And once we throw aside that definition, we have to start working with other things. We have to forget the sort of formal approach and start trying to determine what is meaningful in social relations and what were the features of African social relations which were most meaningful. Now, that's what I'll talk about for a little while. I think that just as we can say in the small societies before the European arrived in Africa, certain states and certain political developments were in existence. Similarly, we can emphasize the culture history. We can try to determine in the period before the 15th century what were the lines along which African culture history was developing. And here we must understand that Africans, for the most part, were living in small societies, some of them so-called stateless societies, just a family, an extended family, no superstructure of the state, no huge territorial delimitations. But whatever the situation in which they lived, whether it was an isolated family unit, whether it was a clan arrangement, or whether it was a state, it seems to me that certain principles can be extracted as the dynamic principles of African culture. And this is what represents the civilization having eroded the erroneous concepts surrounding it of Africa in that particular period. I'll try to select just a few of the most outstanding, in my estimation, of these principles. One of them is hospitality, the way people related to each other in terms of hospitality. Another one is the way in which the people of a certain age in this society were treated. Another is the whole question of law in African society, the way that the law was administered, the whole ethos behind the law. I think I would like to take those 3 points and start to have a look at them now. I start with hospitality. In the African systems, Europeans who arrived in the 15th century or Europeans who arrived subsequently within an indigenous context saw the Africans living by themselves. It's amazing the regularity with which they stressed the nature of African hospitality, the extent of African hospitality. This was not just, as it were, an individual response of Africans. It was rooted in the nature of their social organization. The extended family, for instance, was in itself an agency of social relief. It was in itself an agency which would deny the existence of the extremes of poverty and abandonment in African society, which we find in modern capitalist society, because as an extended family, it meant that the responsibility was theirs. All members of the family share a responsibility for others. This is the nucleus of the whole concept of hospitality. One can go further and take the principle of the family when it is projected into the clan arrangement. A clan, in a rough sense, is a whole collection of families. It's a set of people who share a common ancestor and common totems, as sometimes the term is used. Now, within that clan, there are numerous people who don't know each other. They just know they belong to Clan A. They've never seen each other. Their relationship in terms of physical and genetic proximity is very vague. They acknowledge an ancestor who is very remote on the borders between history and legend, but nevertheless, a clan brother is a brother, and he's treated as a brother whenever the occasion arises. In other words, I belong to Clan A, and I come from 300 miles away and I meet another clan brother. He has certain responsibilities towards me to house, feed, clothe me. The system provides for that hospitality. Let me talk about the old men age. Again, we'll start with capitalist society. The old people in the capitalist society have no value. Capitalism wants labor. You finish working. Well, that's tough. In more recent times, you get a pension, but the system doesn't have any further value for you. And capitalist society all over, not just on the question of race, adopts this attitude to elderly people. African society is fundamentally different. Throughout Africa, the principle of gerontocracy prevails. The elder, by virtue of his age, is vested with certain authority and certain power. This is basic because for them, wisdom is a reflection of an experience, and by that very fact, all things being equal. The older the man in the society, the more his experience and the problems within that society, the more his reflection on it, and therefore the greater his wisdom. So when he reached a certain stage, he was supposed to be historian, lawyer, guardian of the Constitution, and the president of the state. He was supposed to be a tutor to the young king when he came up, to the king's sons, that is, or nephews, depending on the system. And in effect, these elders were given responsibility. They were free, of course, because of the hospitality from the task of winning a living, and the system asked them to be alert. This is the difference. African society catered for a completely different conception. The man is always growing. The man is always learning until he dies. And that is why field researchers have found that when you go into an African society, you can go and find any old man. Find him, he might be 60, he might be 70, and with perspicacity, he will point out to you elements of the culture and recall episodes of history going back more than 100 years. In other words, more than his lifetime. He had been trained by the society to function in that way. Now, this to me is tremendous. A society that takes you from birth and carries you all the way so that life has meaning to the end. Well, you judge that for yourself. I have never ever read of a jail in traditional African society. They go to African society and they're amazed at the type of social security which existed there in the 15th century. All this stuff I'm talking about is cultural history, the period before the European arrival. Some of it carries over, but I'm talking about traditional African society. All of the travelers into the Western Sudan, time and time again, they reiterated, this is tremendous. How can we travel such huge distances from one end of the empire of Mali to another, and we don't find any robbers, we don't find any vagrants? If we lose something, when we turn up at the court of the king, we find that thing has been transmitted there to be given to us. It was amazing to them because they were operating from the background of brigandage in Europe, highway robbery. Yeah, I mean, our society, well, capitalist society is a robber society. So this explains the whole thing. But in African society, this wasn't so. It wasn't the police who were all around to see that goods and persons were secure. It was the social constraints. People just didn't do that. He says, I left my goods there for months unattended, and when I went back, there wasn't a pin removed. And this is a generalized type of remark that is made about African traditional society, a socially induced security. I'm just suggesting the area that in that society was exemplary in its freedom, especially in comparison with Europe. Now, insofar as there was crime, it had to be dealt with by the law. And the principle of the law was not to deal retribution to an offender, which has largely been the principle of European law until recent times, wherein the whole penal system is still being questioned. That apart, what was happening in African society was that an offender was asked to make restitution, either to the individual whom he offended or to the state, if his offense was against the state or against the society as a whole. So it was a question of restitution rather than retribution being meted out to him. It meant that if he stole, the object was to replace what he stole, not to put him into jail. I have never ever read of a jail in traditional African society. This was the African traditional society which didn't jail people. And what I am developing, therefore, is the idea that there are principles of human activity which we need to look at, which are quite distinct from the so-called principles of civilization. And that when we look at that, we begin to see how tremendously meaningful African life was.